We are all longing to go home to some place we have never been. We are all longing to go home to some place we have never been. A place half remembered and half envisioned, we can only catch glimpses of from time to time. Community. Somewhere there are people to whom we can speak with passion without having the words catch in our throats. Somewhere a circle of hands will open to receive us. Eyes will light up as we enter. Voices will celebrate with us whenever we come into our own power. Community means strength that joins our strength to do the work that must be done. Arms to hold us when we falter. A circle of healing. A circle of friends. Someplace we can be free. From the Gospel of Mark. One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another. And seeing that Jesus answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, 'Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these."
As part of our series on friendship, we are highlighting and spotlighting a couple of our small group ministries. We have all different kinds of small groups here at Countryside. Last week you saw an example of a service small group that was working together with the Syrian refugee families. This week we are highlighting our journey groups, specifically those groups that are that circle of friends for one another that Eric was just reading about. Those folks who gather together because they choose to be with one another on a regular basis and get to know each other better. And today we are highlighting a group that we have most creatively called the Hess Small Group. Because it's Chris Hess, Mary Watke, and Bill Selgren. If you would come up here and join us, we have a couple questions we'd like to ask you about your experience with these journey groups. First and foremost, I think it would be helpful for all of us to understand maybe how organically this group kind of came together, how long you've been together, when do you meet, those kinds of things.
Good morning. My name is Chris Hess. We first started as a new member group. So my husband and I became new members, and our daughter Abby had been to Kindernook before that, and so we had known Mary Beth. And so she asked if Steve and I would lead a small group. And so we did that based on the Phoenix Affirmations, and from there we just continued to meet. And along the way we picked up a few new friends. Their groups have shifted and changed, and so they were looking for a new group to join. And so we've been together, I would say, over 5 years, and we meet on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. because some of us needed child care, and so having the nursery here was just a gift for us, and it works well with people's busy lives for us to meet then.
So what is it that brings you joy about being together? I mean, what is it about the group that brings out the best of who you are as friends?
A year ago, my doctors discovered a medical condition they said was going to require a very painful, debilitating cure. I said yes, and away we went. But I couldn't attend church or small group for over a month. What these guys did, they videoed every small group session with their iPhones and emailed them to me so I could participate with my family and my extended friends.
When my husband was in Brookstone for rehab a couple of years ago, well, it would be just 2 years ago this month, he was in there for about 3 months, and 2 different times the entire circle came at 12:30 and brought lunch, just to make him feel like he was part of that group, which this was so important to him. So important to him that it was so uplifting for all of us. And everybody came, including the children, and it was just fun.
And I would say we do that because we love each other at this point. We don't do that out of obligation, but we have been together, and I think I said this at the 9 o'clock service, when you meet on a weekly basis, and although your focus is on spirit and some type of faith message, your lives are entwined in those every week meetings. And so you become part of the fabric of each other's lives. And I think it's accurate to say that we love each other, and we do those things because we feel like we're part of each other's circle of life. And we want to do that. My husband, Steve, is a techie kind of guy. And so we knew for Bill that being connected to the small group, we felt like that would be part of his healing process. And he really wasn't at a point where visitors were really working. He was in a pretty bad way. And so that was a way for us to provide support and caring for him, was to provide those little videos on a weekly basis. And we do that not out of obligation, but because of our genuine caring and love for each other.
So being able to support each other and rely on each other is part of the joy of what it means to have a friend, right?
It does. And I think when we started, none of us knew that we would be here 5 years later and at this place. But each week as you go through and people share things, people take more steps into faith and trust till you get to this point where you just really have a huge circle of trust with each other. And so you can be vulnerable if you need to, and okay to ask for help if you need to. And a lot of us are givers here.
Yeah.
And so it is joyous for us to be able to give to others.
How do you see that then as your support with one another and being able to rely on one another and uplift one another? How do you see that as an experience of God within your relationships with one another?
We come from different religious backgrounds and different cycles of life, but we've found so many commonalities between us, and we celebrate not only these commonalities, but then we accept the differences and rejoice them. So I feel like God is there in that group every week, speaking to us, putting his arms around us, a very relationship-oriented, loving God.
In the last few days, as I was kind of way in my subconscious thinking, what exactly are we going to say, but not wanting to put any words in it. Every time I would think about this, I would think of one of my favorite lines from Les Miserables, excuse me, which is when Jean Valjean sings, "To love another person is to see the face of God." And that song just kept running through my mind for the last few days, because that is what this group is all about. It is the face of God within each other.
How does that trust get built? Is it something that just happens automatically? Is it something that, how do you deal with differences? How does trust play into the challenges that you meet? You obviously, well, maybe you do. Maybe this is like the perfect quintessential group where you always agree on everything, right? Is that what it is? No. So how does trust play a part of that? And how does God's experience help you with that?
We accept the differences, and we trust each other to the point where we're willing to say, when somebody else is presenting a point, which may be different than what I thought I understood things, to say, aha, I never understood it quite that way. And I want to combine that with what I felt and knew before.
I have felt, when I came from kind of a different place where I felt spiritually bereaved, if you will, when I came here, and all these members of this group, I always felt totally welcome to express my sometimes agnostic feelings. I use the word atheistic at the last service, but really it's more agnostic. And then especially Steve, Chris's husband, always seems to be saying something that is exactly what I'm thinking and makes me feel like I'm perfectly free to have these feelings. And they've just helped me grow so much back into a spiritual place that I needed.
Yeah, I think that if you've had that experience where somebody says something and it's kind of in that moment you needed to hear it, or you needed that challenge or that aha feeling, we find that happens where somebody will say something and it rings true, or it's reassuring for somebody, or it's somebody then feels similar and you're not alone in your feeling. And I think I speak for all of us. I mean, we really think that God is speaking through that person. And so that presence is there really all the time for us. And we do have differences. Even this morning we met our small group and we were talking about the sermon last week, and our takeaways, Steve and I, were 180 degrees different. I mean, that's where we started. But a couple rules for our group is that we are accepting, which is what Bill talked about, of everybody's opinion, and we do our best to be non-judgmental. And I can't say that we're perfect at that, but those are really two rules that we have, because we want people to be real. We want people to be who they are and wherever they are. And we all come at different places, and as Bill said, we have quite a variety of faith traditions in our group. And so it just, people need to just be real about where they're at so that they can grow, I think, in their faith journey.
Well, thank you so much for sharing who you are with us. This is an important fact, I think, of friendship and our experience with God, where we don't necessarily agree with one another, but we have love that guides us in our relationships with one another. So thank you for being a part of it. From the Gospel of John. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love.
So last week, we noted that one of the great kind of revolutionary things that Christianity introduced into the kind of the technology of God, or understanding who God is, or the experience of God, is the Trinity. The Trinity basically implies that God cannot be reduced down to a single point, that God can only be reduced down to a relationship, and really a trifold relationship. That's as far as you can reduce God down to. Therefore, God is inherently relational. So no matter what all you think about the technicalities of Trinity and who's got its first place, second place, whatever, that the idea, though, of the relationality of God is really, in my estimation, golden. And if God created everything, then everything is created with relationality inherent in it, including God's relationship with everything that is created is inherently a property within it. I love this, the Rublev Trinity, that where you've got the table set actually for four, not just for three. You have the Trinity, but then there's a fourth place, which is really the implication is that God is so relational that we are meant to have a place at that table as well, to actually participate in the godliness of God. It's quite revolutionary. I wish more Christians would catch up with the revolution. That a lot of Christians are still back in the very earliest stage of awareness of God being that kind of judgmental tyrant kind of God who's external to us, up in the heavens someplace, and that basically a relationship with God is defined by God setting certain rules and then watching to make sure that you obey those rules, kind of like a cosmic Santa Claus almost, going to reward the nice and punish the naughty. And that's kind of where a lot of people's relationship stays. It's highly unrelational. It's basically that kind of God relies on basically religious leaders propping up, saying, hey, here's what if you want to follow the faith, here's what you do. Here are the rules. Here are the guidelines. Like that. Don't worry about an actual personal relationship with this God. We'll just tell you what it is. So it's always a relationship with God by secondary measures, not by direct experience. We should know, if we start paying attention to this kind of God, that if we're going to look for, well, how do we directly experience this God? Well, we should know at least one thing, is that there's a whole lot of naughty people out there who are getting lots of rewards. so this God can't be too good at judging naughty and nice. And there's a lot of nice people out there who don't get so many rewards. So whoever this God is cannot be this very effective judge up in the clouds. Although on a certain level, though, all of us are, with respect to fidelity to God, probably get on the naughty list, and yet God keeps in relationship with us in our experience, which tells us that God is bought into us on far deeper levels than simply whether we follow the rules or not. There's something that's far deeper than that, and that's where Jesus was really signaling when he talked about God as being a parent. He referred to Abba, Father. That God, like a parent, is bought into us on far deeper levels than whether we simply follow the rules or not. Far more kind-hearted, far more compassionate than the judging tyrant kind of God. Of course, depending on what kind of father or mother you had growing up, you may or may not have a difficult time drawing a line between the parent of your birth and God as a parent. So sometimes people have trouble with that metaphor. But in the ideal realm, God being the ideal parent, it's golden. It really talks about a deep and loving relationship, not simply a relationship of sovereign and subject. But Jesus went one step deeper too in the Gospel of John. Late, just before he is crucified, he sits down with his disciples and he says, "Hey, I call you friends," and really also revealing that God calls us friends on a deep level when we really do surrender ourselves into this relationship, this loving relationship with God. We discover that God isn't just simply our parent. A parent always, even a loving parent, they all have expectations of us, don't they? They all kind of have ways they want to still guide us, and we all, when we relate to God as or to a parent, we always kind of know, well, we hope we don't disappoint this parent and so forth. But there is an aspect in which God relates to us like a friend does. And so a friend isn't a parent, right? I mean, well, you could be kind of friends with your children in a certain respect, but a friend doesn't try to guide you everywhere. A friend is actually going to be more supportive of you than guiding of you. A friend does not try to impose the friend's will upon you unless that friend sees that you're in danger, right? And the friend also enjoys, just simply wants to be around you for the pure enjoyment of it. So there's a relationship there, not for a particular purpose, but simply for the enjoyment of the relationship itself, not to fulfill anything else, but to enjoy that relationship. And where this becomes, I think, particularly important is that if you actually do want to develop in a relationship with God and follow what we might call guidance from God, I mean, it's kind of hard because God's invisible, right? And God also does not speak with an audible voice. So if we're going to try to follow God's guidance, then what we're really doing is we're trying to follow hunches, gut hunches, and those voices in our heads. And how many voices do you have in your head? I don't know about you, but I mean, what are there, 1,000 there at any given moment? Just all kinds of voices in our heads and feelings about ourselves, and some of them are beautiful, some of them are not so beautiful, and everything in between. And so how do you sort through all these different voices and intuitions and say, okay, well, this one's from God and the rest of these aren't? I mean, it's hard, right? And so we actually have to envision, we have to kind of get an idea of, well, what kind of God is it we're searching for amidst all those voices. And a lot of times what people do is they take the voice that's in their head, which is in everybody's head constantly, which is the judging voice, the voice that's always kind of evaluating and finding you coming up short, the one that's always criticizing you, the one that's always kind of suggesting, you're just not going to make it. You're just never going to do well, that voice. And they're so used to hearing about God the tyrant judge that's the voice they look for. And so that's the voice they associate most with God. And yet, that is the voice that you could guarantee is most associated not with God, but with you. That is a natural voice that occurs in any of our heads, and yet suddenly we make thereby we make ourselves God. Jesus says, invites us to look at a very non-intuitive place. It says God, the voice of God is the voice that comes to us like a friend. It is a friendly voice. And so it's going to be more supportive of you than critical. And even when it's critical, it's not critical like you are no good, but rather simply saying, hey, you're bigger than that. Why are you acting so small? You're such an incredibly grand person. You've been created in such a beautiful way. Why are you acting so small here? Come on. And it's an invitation then to act in another way. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, if you pray, I mean, it's actually incredibly hard to just shut off that voice that's the judging voice. But it comes much easier if you actually acknowledge that God comes to you as friend. And every voice that you think is guidance to you, ask, well, would a friend say that? Would a friend do this? Is this a friendly voice? If it is, well, then I would keep paying attention to what it's saying. But this gets actually much deeper than simply trying to sort out the voices that are in our heads. This notion of God as friend affects actually our lived experience in the world and how we actually discover God in the world itself. You heard the scripture that Chris read earlier. Beloved, let us love one another because love is from God. Now, note that there should be the word all love is from God. The author is not implying that some love is from God and there might be other love from other things or gods. But rather, all love finds its origin in God. Everyone who loves, therefore, is born of God and knows God. I mean, why do we keep on arguing about which religions know God and which religions don't? I mean, our own religion says anybody who loves knows God. Or why does anybody worry about people with atheistic voices or what have you? Do they love? Then whether they know God by name or not is beside the point. They know God. And whoever does not love does not know God. Now there's another good one to remember. How loving how do we assess the legitimacy of someone's faith? Well, how loving are they? How much do they know God? Well, how loving are they? For God is love. And there's the real revolution there. That actually any experience of love is an experience of God because God is love. So this is why Paul, it's so critical to Paul that we get the love thing right. Because it's not only affects who we are, but it also affects how we manifest God in the world. Paul says, you know the words well probably, if I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels but do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. So when we give and receive love, there's something quite powerful going on. Literally, there are experiences of God swirling around in that exchange. And this is why, for instance, our small groups, I think, are so powerful when they're actually gathered in the name of God, seeking to find God, and becoming actually through talking about each other's lives and becoming vulnerable with each other, actually becoming friends. I mean, that's an incredible experience because a friendship is actually a higher level of love than most love that's out there. I mean, like for instance, we're all supposed to love everybody, right? So, okay, great. But while we're supposed to love everybody, we're not called to spend time with everybody. So you spend time with those who personally interest you. And so that's a higher form of love then. It's actually a cherishing of something in another person. Our friends are ones who intentionally spend time with us. They don't have to, and yet they do. And yet our friends are also, aren't they, the ones who know us better than anybody else, and therefore they know our flaws better than anybody else. And yet, even though they know our flaws, they choose to spend time with us. Now there's high love. Therefore, there's high God. When you experience the love of a friend who knows you deeply, knows your foibles and flaws, and yet chooses and loves to be around you, you are directly experiencing God. That's what God does, right? Sees us for all we are and still loves and wants relationship with us. And then when we actually look to our friend and see their flaws, all their foibles, their struggles, and yet we see that bigger picture and love them, guess what? We literally, our love anyway, we aren't God, but our love is God. Mary was right with that Les Miserables quote. When we love another, we see the face of God. That's just half of it, though. When we love another, we not only see the face of God, but we be the face of God. We discover that this whole Trinity thing, this whole relational thing, has invited us into that relationship in such a way that we not only receive God, but we become part of God and God's activity in the world. This meal really brings that home. Because when Jesus called us friends, he said, there is no greater love than this, that one lays down one's life for one's friends. And in this meal, he took bread and he broke it, saying, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Do this as often as you eat of it in remembrance of me." He may as well have said, "This is broken for the sake of friendship." So likewise, after his supper, he took the cup, saying, "This is the cup of the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me." By eating this bread and drinking this cup, we remember Christ's death. We celebrate Christ's resurrection. And we come to know just how deep the friendship goes with this one we call God. And he invites us to remember this every single time we eat a meal. Remember, you are my friend. Remember, I come to you as a friend. These are the gifts of God for the people of God. As our servers to come forward to prepare this table, I invite you to join me in reminding ourselves of who we are and whose we are. We are an open and affirming family of faith, welcoming all to God's table of love and acceptance. We are diverse yet united by Christ's example. We care for one another, support one another, and challenge one another to become all that God creates us to be. We work together to nurture our community and to promote peace and justice in our conflicted world. Amen.